Hey everybody, good evening. Welcome to week 6 of Advanced Programming with Java here at Portland State University. Seems like we're almost done. We've only got a couple more classes left. Disclaimer for tonight. I've been fighting a cold all week, and I think I'm on the upside. I don't think I'm contagious. But I'm a little low on energy, which might be a good thing. I don't know, maybe for you. So I might be taking more breaks than usual. I might hopefully be going at a slower pace, and my brain isn't sharp as it usually is. And so then if it takes me an extra moment to answer a question, or if I tend to meander a little bit more than usual, please be patient, but please also let me know if I'm just sort of droning on and on. I'm not medicated, but maybe I should be. So anyway, okay, so for tonight, first we'll talk about sort of like where we're at, projects, stuff like that. Then I'll, both this week and next week, I'll be talking about GWT. And so this week we'll get an introduction to what the Project 5 archetype gives you, and we'll walk through some of that. And then in the latter part of class, we'll make some more progress and hopefully finish off the Game of Life code kata. Okay. So to start off though, how is Project 4? So your client and your server. So lots of good questions on the community. Any other questions, thoughts that have come up, things that you'd like me to know, feedback, things you'd like to share maybe with future students? Yes?
Just one thing to share, a really cool tool. This is called Postman, which you can send HTTP requests, like structure them in a GUI, and send them. It's really helpful.
Postman, okay.
It's a Google Chrome app.
Oh, cool. So something running for like Chrome. Nice.
What you do post and get, where you can actually just talk about your values, and it'll give you spaces for your key value pairs.
It is pretty great.
Yeah.
Nice.
You can save them so you can redo them later.
Oh, that's cool. Right, yeah. So yeah, don't have to write your own HTTP forms because it's the year 2016, damn it. Yeah. Yep.
So the final's in 2 weeks, correct?
Final is in 2 weeks.
Anything you want to tell us about that? Like,
Come back next week and find out about the final. That's what I want to tell you about it. Guys have some reason to show up, but not the witty repartee. Anything else in Project 4? Okay. Cool. Has anybody started Project 5 yet? And that's okay. That's why you got 2 whole weeks to do it. Okay, look at all that stuff. So let's take a look at Project 5 again. It was assigned last week. We kind of walked through it. I'll bring it up here maybe just to reference it. So we walked through it last week. And it basically is for augmenting your, or creating a rich internet application with GWT for your appointment book. So there's an archetype that will create the, a working project, sort of again like Project 4, one of those toy applications that hopefully gives you the building blocks and most importantly all the configuration, all the Maven stuff, all the GWT configuration that you need to get up and running so you can focus on not understanding everything about the framework or how Maven works and stuff like that. You can learn about that in the lectures. But it lets you focus on building your application and writing code to build your application. So let me walk through the application here and source code, and that'll probably take us up until the first break. So here I have. So last time I created I ran the archetype to create myself a project, and to run the GWT application, you say Maven GWT. So there's a GWT plugin to Maven, and you say GWT run. So this launches something called development mode for GWT. I had already compiled my stuff, so I didn't go through and compile it, but we'll talk more about the GWT build process in a little bit. It launches GWT development mode, or maybe this is super development mode. I don't know, whatever. This is running your GWT application in a way that allows you to debug it, and allows you, it gives you some better feedback than just deploying it as a normal old web application. So GWT as I said last time, allows you to develop rich internet applications almost exclusively in Java, or at least all the logic is in Java, and a lot of the presentation is in Java also, which means that you end up representing, your web page, the thing the user sees, as Java code. And we'll see how exactly all of that works in a minute. Because everything's in Java, they provide this development mode that allows you to debug your application and rapidly develop your application without having to debug points in your browser, or have to add a bunch of not print lines, alerts and stuff in order to figure out what's going on in your JavaScript. So that's really nice. And so that the front end is HTML and JavaScript and CSS, which has all been compiled from Java source code. And on the back end, well, it's just a Java application. And so that's nice. So on the back end, it's all Java. In the middle, and we'll see this in a little bit, in the middle is an abstraction over the client-server communication. So in Project 4, you sent HTTP requests across, and you had the HTTP client. No, what did I call it? That little helper class where you give like the post method, where you just give it like a URL and a bunch of parameters, stuff like that. So you didn't have to like assemble all of that yourself. GWT goes a step further and basically gives you something that looks like a remote object, meaning that there's an object that lives on the server, and you can get something that looks a lot like that object on the client side and make a call to it. So it takes care of transforming the data of your in your client application, which are Java objects. It takes care of transforming those Java objects into a format that can be sent over the wire, so a text-based format because it's HTTP, over the wire, and then received on the server side, and then taking that wire format, turning it back into Java objects, and executing Java objects on your server side. So as a result, what you have to worry about is Java, and GWT takes care of all the plumbing and communication in between them. So we'll see more of that tonight. So you're running here in development mode, and this is how I recommend that you develop your application. You click, and this gives you like some output. It's running a Jetty server for the back end, and so like standard output from the Jetty server would go here. This is sort of talking about the front end. You can click Launch Default Browser, so that opens it up in a browser tab here in Chrome. It's compiling the appointment book, so it's taking the Java source code and compiling it into JavaScript, and now you've got your application. It's a very simple application. It has a string. This is the beginning of your GWT interface. It has a button called Ping Server, and when I click on that button, it pops up a dialog box, pops up an alert that contains the string My Owner's Appointment Book with 1 appointments, and here is the appointment. So this is the toy application that you get started with, but it's got all the pieces, parts that you need. It's got code that builds your user interface that runs in the browser. It's compiled in JavaScript and runs in the browser. And it's got it's got a button that will contact the server, and what the server returns is an appointment book. It's an appointment book object. The server doesn't do that much with it. Okay, so that's the application. Now let's figure out how you implement this thing in GWT. So I'll go over to IntelliJ. Okay, so let me hide this real quick. Okay, so here's my appointment book GWT directory that was created by the archetype. And it's got things that are familiar to us by now for Maven. It's got integration tests, it's got tests, and it's got main. Let's walk through main. We'll walk through the application, and then we'll walk through the tests. So one of the nice things about GWT is that even though it's a web application, it's a rich internet application, you can still test it. And you can still write unit tests for it, and you can also write integration tests for it, so you can exercise a lot of the functionality. So what have we got in our main? Remember, main is a directory that contains the source code for your application, the main stuff, not test code. It's got some Java source code. It's got some resources, and these are just configuration files that contain information about your application. I'll touch on them briefly. I don't believe you'll need to change any. Actually, you may or may not need to change things. This is a configuration file that talks about, that basically configures things about your GWT application. It lets you use certain libraries like the user library from GWT contains all of your, it contains a lot of the widget classes. We'll see what those are. Uses the standard theme, which gives you some look and feel thing. It also lets you use some of my classes. So the fact that we'll have, like, your appointment book will be one of these objects that's sent between the client and the server. It's serialized. I think someone earlier on in the course asked, hey, can I use serialization for things? This is when you can use serialization. So serialization is a API, is a concept in Java that basically means take an object, convert it into some other format, usually have it leave the VM, and then reconstitute that object on the other side. If you watch the reflection lecture, you'll see some of the underpinnings for that technology. This file defines something called an entry point, which we'll see in a while. And then it also, let me make it bigger so you can see it. It also defines a servlet. So remember I said how there's this client-server communication, and it does all of this stuff with serializing objects back and forth and provides this remote object that you can reference. Underneath the covers, that's all implemented using a servlet. Right? I mean, it's a Java application. So as, how do you do HTTP communication in Java? You use a servlet. So GWT uses servlets, although you don't write servlets. So you won't be writing implementations of do post and do get. No, instead what you'll be doing is registering these service objects that allow you to do these remote method calls. And the way you tell the GWT application that, hey, I've got one of these services is by adding a servlet entry here in the module file. So I'm telling you about this file. You might need to modify it only if you do things like rename your ping service. So if you rename that class, then you'll have to modify this file. Otherwise, you ought to be able to use it pretty much. You have to be able to use it as is. So that's there in the resources directory. What else is there? Oh, oops, that's not what I wanted. Resources directory. We'll come back to you. So that's the sort of configuration, web app. Okay, this contains a couple of interesting things. It's a web application, so it's got a web XML, and so here's you need to tell GWT about your servlets. You also need to tell the web application. So GWT applications are deployed as WAR files, as web applications, because they're just Java on the back end. And so you need to do a couple things. You need to configure your servlet here, and you need to map it to a URL. This URL path is actually kind of important, and we'll see how that's used later on. And this particular this web application also has a default page, and that's appointmentbook.html. So appointmentbook.html is this file that's served up right here, right? We've got it right here. So when you go to the application, you go to appointmentbook.html. And if you look at the source for this, you'll see it's really quite simple. It's just what's served up right here. And so this might be, well, pretty much all of the HTML that you're going to have to write. Maybe you'll want, some extra stuff in here. But the important point is this JavaScript include right here. So this JavaScript include in the HTML page instructs the browser to go download all of the generated JavaScript. And so when this application is built, the generated JavaScript resides at this location, at that URL. And that's what gets the whole process started. So you've got this HTML here, plus a bunch of magical JavaScript that gives you, all of this right here. Okay. Yes?
Why do we have 3 XML files that all have the same information?
Right, good question. So wait a second. I saw that you defined the servlet information in that GWT modules thing. Let's see here. Let's go back here. Why is there all this duplicated information? I don't know why exactly. And this thing right here. I don't know why this is duplicated. It might be that I don't need one of these. Huh. I can look into that later because it seems to be exactly the same thing. So it might be that I can get rid of that one. I think that's just some vestigial XML configuration. So these guys are the same, ignore that. So this is for configuring the GWT module, which is like you can think of it as the GWT applications, what GWT needs to know. And then this web.xml configures the web application. So why is it?
So if we had multiple routes and we added another servlet in there, we would do it in both of these?
Yes, if you had multiple GWT services, which are both servlets, you would have to duplicate that. Have to have another line in each one of those files, which you may or may not do. And the thing about these services is they are just GWT. It's not like a REST API that like has nice URLs and will give you something like JSON or even XML. This is, as a matter of fact, if we try real hard, we might. Actually, no, we probably can't just hit it in a browser without knowing all sorts of other like application-specific information. Maybe we can look at it go by in like the debugger or something like that. But this is a special servlet that knows how to interact with JavaScript, with compiled JavaScript code. Why is it duplicated? I don't know if there's a good reason other than the fact that the Jetty and web containers look for something in the web XML, and GWT needs to know which of these servlets, because you could have other servlets, I guess, needs to know which servlets are GWT services. Yeah, I can't give you a good reason.
Since you said we probably won't need to add any other servlets, are we not doing anything but pinging the servlet?
We'll see that you can use that same ping service to do other things. So it's called ping because that's just the way, that's what's in the toy application. But we'll see how you can augment that service. You can rename it and stuff like that too. And maybe we will do that. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see where we go with this. But you can add methods to it to have it do more things. Okay, this is all boilerplate. Watch the lecture if you want to learn more about it. But this is like all the non-Java code that you need to deal with. There's not very much. If you want to have CSS and stuff like that, you could, and then you can figure out on your own how to do that. Okay, so boilerplate, not terribly interesting. Now let's look at the application. So let's go back to our page. We got this application. We saw that this text was in the HTML, but where does this button come from? Right? There's no button. You look in the source code, and there's no button here. Where does all that come from? Well, the button, and as we'll see, there's some other stuff. As a matter of fact, let's turn on debugging. Tools, more tools, developer tools. And let's just sort of roam around, see what we got here. So that we've got this button, and its style is GWT button. I guess we really don't have too much else there in the HTML. Oh, we got kind of a crazy iframe and stuff, but then there's this button. So let's see where that button comes from. Okay. Now, I guess one more tour through boilerplate. If we go back to the module definition, you'll see that there's something called an entry point. So, remember in projects 1, 2, and 3, where did your program start? Main. In project 4, where did your server side start? What?
Jetty.
Jetty. Where did your code start? The servlet. So, remember when we have these long-running processes, these server processes, the programming paradigm is a little different. Of course, there is a main, right? The program's got, when you launch Jetty, when you run the JVM, it's got to start somewhere, right? But like your code plugs into that. Your code, your servlet is created when your web application is deployed. Like this object is created, and then it sort of sits there waiting for a request to come in. We're actually waiting for a request to be routed to it through Jetty and stuff like that. So sort of the entry point of your server is your web server is your servlet. In GWT on the client side, so on the server side, it's the same thing. There's a servlet that gets started up, and all of your services and stuff. Yeah, all of your services get created because they are servlets. That's on the server side. On the client side, you've got your UI. So where does your UI start? There's not a main method. It's not like we sort of run something and then it finishes and it's done. On the UI side, it's sort of the same concept. Where it's like your application starts up and it says, okay, I'm going to display my UI, and now I'm going to wait for something to happen. That code that initializes your UI, that builds your UI, is called your entry point. And so the entry point here is implemented by this appointment book GWT class. This class lives over in the source tree in main Java. Main Java has your package, and then it has two sub-packages, client and server. Client is all the code that resides on your client side in your UI, the code that is compiled into JavaScript, and we'll see a little bit later, but that puts certain restrictions on what your Java code can do. And then there's code on your server side, which is all the stuff that resides only on the back end, and we'll see what happens there. So here in our client package, among other things, we have this class called Appointment Book GWT. This is where your web application starts. So entry point is an interface, that's a GWT interface that, I'm going to see it up here, yeah, entry point, that has one method called onModuleLoad. And this is where your client-side code starts. So let's walk through this thing. So an appointment book has something called an alerter, which we'll get to in a second. But more importantly, it's got a button. So a button is a GWT class that represents a button in your UI. So as I go into gory detail in the lecture, GWT offers a Java API that models a web UI. And so you've got two kinds of objects. You've got widgets, which are things like buttons and checkboxes and text fields and text areas and like all the things that you can interact with and all the things you can see on a web page. And it also has a set of objects, class hierarchy of containers, which are ways to arrange or lay out widgets and other containers. And so then, I guess we don't really go into too much detail here as far as laying things out, but when you watch the lecture, this is one of those lectures that you need to watch. There's also really good documentation online for GWT and stuff like that, but I think here I would advise you to spend some time going through the GWT lecture, not necessarily the advanced one, but certainly the first one, to get an idea of what all this stuff is. Right, and so then these are all Java objects that ultimately get compiled down to JavaScript and run in your browser. But sort of conceptually, you can think about it as, okay, this Java object here is a button in my browser. So down here in this add widgets method, I initialize, I create that button. So I create the button field, and there's a constructor, and it's got a label associated with it. Okay, you have HTML in there, whatever. And that creates the button object. Now, I want to do something with the button object, right? I mean, some stuff is just visual, right? Some widgets are just visual, like, you know, just a label, a message, you know, or whatever. But most widgets you want to be able to interact with. You know, you want to be able to type some text in there. You want to be able to, like, move it, click on it, and stuff like that. What does your application, well, so when you click on it, you want to react to that. So how do you tell your, that button what to do when you're clicked? Well, there's this concept in UI programming and in GWT called event handling. Right? Again, think about it, right? Projects 1, 2, and 3. The input was specified at the beginning and passes through your program and output spits out. Sort of like one event in, stuff comes out. And that was a straight line program. Okay, but UIs aren't like that. Right? I mean, maybe you could essentially have something which is like, you know, I don't know, download a file and something pops up and all you see is like, you know, a scroll bar being, or a progress bar being filled up and then the program exits. You could have that, but not normally, right? Normally you pop up an application, you interact with it, you do all sorts of things there, and the program itself, that's not a straight line program. That's like UI where the program comes up and then needs to be told when stuff happens, because different stuff can happen at different times. So the way that you, I'm going to hide some of this stuff here. The way that you handle one of these things is that you, the way you handle events is that you register event handlers on your widgets. So the button class has a method called addClickHandler. And when you send that add click handler, an object that implements this click handler interface. And this is the this object. Okay, and the click handler has one method, and that method is onClick, and that is delivered a click event when someone clicks on the button. Okay, I want to go through this. This is a really important concept to learn. Okay, so I have a widget. My program wants to do something when that widget is interacted with. When the widget is interacted with, an event is generated from the underlying windowing system, in this case the browser, and is delivered to this click handler that I registered on it. So when this, and this is an anonymous inner class, which I guess we really haven't talked about right here. Is this syntax wigging anybody out? Is everybody familiar with what this is? Okay, I guess we, okay. More stuff to learn about. So this is Java language thing, not GWT. Sometimes you have an object that has a very short lifetime, or is very single purpose. So you guys have been creating classes like appointment, an appointment book that you create, and it lives for like a while in your program. You create these objects and you're adding them to it and you do stuff with it. Those are like normal classes, and they're long-lived. But other times, and there's a lot of functionality in there, right? Your appointment has all sorts of data that is accessed, and your appointment book has a couple methods on it, and et cetera, et cetera. You do a lot with the methods. There are design patterns like strategy, or what would be another good one? Brain failing me. There are some design patterns that call for objects that are really simple, like objects that all they do is specify an algorithm, like a comparator, right? And saw in like the Java Util lecture we talk about a comparator, and a comparator has one method, compare, takes two objects and returns some value. That's an algorithm. That's a function, right? You're not doing a lot with that. And so then, so the argument goes, it's like, well, why do if all I've got is a class that has one method, and it's a method that's inherited from the interface, and it just does a little bit of stuff, so maybe it's only like 5 lines long, why do I need to go to the trouble of creating like this new .java file with its own class declaration and all of this stuff? Syntactically, shouldn't there be an easier way to do that? And the answer is yes. There's something called an anonymous inner class. So if you look at, no, that doesn't help very much either. Okay. If you look at the add click handler API, it takes a click handler. Okay, and so I could do something like say, okay, great, I'll create a new, my button click handler class that implements click handler, and then it'll override the onClick method, and that'll be in a separate file. I have to navigate over to that file to find out, and maybe the click handler only like executes 3 lines of code, and that's not very useful. It's a lot of waste. It's a lot of overhead. Wouldn't it be easier if we could just declare that code right here? That's what we can do with an anonymous inner class. So here we say, create a new click handler. Now, click handler itself is an interface. You can't instantiate it, right? Well, you can't instantiate it because interface has abstract methods, have methods that aren't implemented. But I could instantiate that click handler if I specified an implementation for all those abstract methods, and that's what I do here. I create a new click handler, and then I specify basically the content of a class with no name, that implements that click handler interface. And so it overrides, it implements the one method of click handler onClick. And so this is a Java language syntax for allowing you to do things like say, hey, I'm going to add my click handler, and then 3 lines later, here's what I'm going to do when that button is clicked. Okay? Okay. And here's what it does, and it's huge. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make this a little easier to read by extracting this out into a method called and I want to put it up here in appointment book GWT. I'm going to call it ping server. There, now it's a little easier to read. So now when I click on my button, I'm going to call this ping server method. Okay. So what does ping server do? Don't look at the code. What ping server does is it will it'll contact the server and say, hey, tell me what the give me an appointment book and all of his appointments. And the way it does that is by calling a service method. So in the Java world, when you want to in the Java world, when you want to do something with another object, what do? You get that object and you call a method on it, right? This is a very natural thing to do. And gee, wouldn't it be great if I could use that same, like, give me an object and call a method on it, abstraction, with code that doesn't live in my VM but lives in another VM, that lives on the server, right? That would be very convenient. You're using the same Java language idioms that you're used to for asking somebody to do something for you, even though that somebody is actually like some service on, that's over on, it's over the internet. That's remote to my VM. So the GWT's service concept allows you to do that. So I have something called a ping service that will return me an appointment book. The way this is implemented is with two interfaces and an implementation. So let's step away from this code for a while, for a moment, and look at this service. Okay, so the first thing that I do is I call this magical Gwt Create method. So Gwt is a Gwt built-in class. It's one of their classes. And there's this create method, which is magic, for lack of a better term. So Gwt has some magic. Things like, like this, where it's like, give me an object which is really, whenever I call its methods, go make a remote method call for me. Okay? It's like, yes, Gwt Create knows how to do that, knows all the plumbing. Oh yeah, and by the way, do it in JavaScript. I guess that's really where the magic comes from. So, and what do I want to create? I want to create an instance of this ping service. Okay. Ping service is an interface that lives in the client package. It's a regular old interface. It extends something called a remote service. This is a GWT remote service. So this tells the GWT framework, the GWT compiler, any tools that are using it, that this is a service that's going to be remote, that's going to be invoked remotely from the client, from the JavaScript, from the browser client. And it provides, this ping service provides one method, ping, which returns an appointment book. Okay, nothing too unusual there. Let's take a look at the implementation of it real quick. The implementation of it, there is a ping service impl that extends remote service servlet. This is a GWT class, which is one of those servlets. So it's nothing special here. It's a servlet that overrides the do post method, I think, to do, actually, can I find out here? Yeah. That overrides, oh wait. It extends, okay, so maybe this abstract remote service servlet. Yeah, it extends, okay, right. It overrides do post, so this is just the normal old, right, HTTP servlet. This is from, from the servlet API. It overrides do post to do all sorts of like magical GWT stuff. So, nothing really special there, other than a lot of cool implementation by people at Google who are much smarter than I am. And it does the following. So, it extends remote service servlet, and it implements ping service. Well, ping service, as you'll recall, has a method called ping. So that means my impl, because it's a concrete class, needs to override this ping method. And all it does, it creates a new appointment book. So this is my implementation of appointment book. I think it's got, and it calls add appointment, creates a new appointment, and does that. So toy application, right? Very simple. Your methods will be doing more interesting things. So this returns the appointment book. Also, it overrides a method called do unexpected failure, which will receive any uncaught exception that was thrown by this code and allows you to, first of all, it prints it out here in the server VM, so you can see it there, and then it calls the super class, which I think might, the super implementation, which might return it back to the servlet back to the client in some format. This code is in the server package. So the client code is up here. The server code is here. This code is on the server side. right? So this is running in the, here again, the picture I want you to have in your head is a web browser. Your web browser is talking to something. That's the server. That's the Java web server that's running all this backend code. That's where this code resides right here. And so this is going to be have the same kind of code that's in your Project 4's web applications, in your servlet. That's used by your servlet. I suppose in Project 4, everything was in the same package, so there really wasn't a big distinction. GWT makes you make a distinction. Okay, I want to stop here and ask for questions, because I've been talking for a long time and feeling about, no, just keep talking, maybe it'll make sense. Okay, fair enough? Okay, so you have your service and your serverless impl. And this is just all plain old Java code. Yeah, it extends some GWT classes and stuff like that. And this is code that is invoked remotely from your client. There's one other part of the service interface that I want to point out. There is an annotation on this service, which is at remote service relative path. What this does is it instructs the GWT framework of the URL, the path, to this servlet. Here is the string ping, and that means, and that tells GWT that it is mapped to a servlet whose URL is appointmentbook/ping. So just as long as the stuff is consistent. If you start changing the names of these things, you got to make sure it's consistent. And so, like, if you go and change the name of your relative path here, you've got to update it in places like your web XML and your GWT XML. You probably don't want to do that. So, and I've had students that have like done that, and then it gets all messy. Like they have to clean a whole bunch of stuff in their they clean their project and start over again. So, like if you get everything working with /ping and like you've committed that to version control, if you want to go experiment with it, great. Knowing that you might end up banging your head against the wall for half an hour trying to get some little configuration right, and your time could be better spent doing other things. Okay, so luckily this is all provided to you by the archetype. I don't necessarily want you to be having to be aware, or at least thinking about this stuff as you're developing. I want you to focus on building a web application. Okay, so that's the server side of the service. So there's this interface. It's got an implementation. Let's go back to the client. Okay, so what do I do? So I call this magical GWT Create method, which basically gets compiled into code, JavaScript code that says, aha, go, well, GWT Create will do things like look at that annotation, figure out what URL it needs to hit, and create a JavaScript object that can then go call that URL and do its thing. I ask for an instance of my ping service, and it returns something which is this ping service async. Okay. Remember last time I talked about something called AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript and XML. And I talked about how one of the innovations, one of the features of web browsers that allowed these rich internet applications to be developed is something called the XHR object, the XML Httprequest object. What that allows you to do is make, in your JavaScript, make calls back to the server without reloading your entire page, which is nice from a usability standpoint, right? So you can sit there and you can interact with your page and just make these intermediate calls back to your web server to ask it things, to do data validation, to gather more things to populate your page with. But remember how I said that was asynchronous, meaning that I make the request and the request immediately returns, and then sometime later the response will come back, and the response needs to be delivered to some code. The reason that you want the response, when you go and you make the request, the reason that you want to continue executing immediately is so that your web application doesn't block. Remember back in the old days when you'd be using a UI application on your desktop and you'd go and save and it would start saving to your disk, maybe it would write a lot and then your application would freeze up, right? You start clicking things and nothing happens. Well, that's because you went and like pressed a button, and then it went off and started doing a lot of stuff, and the code that handled that button click never returned because it was waiting for like all this work to be done. And so then as you were clicking more things, those events were being generated, but they weren't being delivered to the code because the one thread that was handling your events was blocked doing a whole bunch of work. Right? So the way this, you go and click things, that might generate events, but there's a queue of events, and definitely in JavaScript and in most, at least older, thick clients, native UIs, there's one thread reading all those events. And that one thread gets blocked and doing a lot of stuff, your application's unusable because you can click and generate events, but they're never handled by anybody. Same thing with the web, actually even more so back in the days of slow connections. So the way Ajax works is that you make a request. It's like, hey, go do a get of this URL, go post this URL and send me the response. But basically what we have to do is you have to say, go make that call. Oh, and by the way, when that call returns, execute this piece of code. So this is an asynchronous call. So it's like, go do it. I'm going to continue on my merry way, handle my next event. And by the way, when this code comes in, handle it then. So the programming paradigm is different than what we're used to. We're used to saying, hey, call this method, and I call it here, and that method will do its thing and return completely, return me the value, and then move on. Asynchronous programming works a little differently. Instead, what you do is you say, hey, go call that method, and by the way, when that method's value returns, here's the code to handle it. Now, this is another one of those situations where you use one of these anonymous inner classes to handle the code. Because here again, the handler is just a is just like a little piece of code, or it's like a single-use piece of code. It's only for handling this particular event. So let's take a look at, okay, so you've got your create method, you take your ping service, and then it returns something called a ping service async. Ping service async is an interface. It's only used on the client, and by convention, it has the same methods as the ping service interface. So this is the async version, except that where ping service has a ping method that returns an appointment book, the async service has a ping method that returns a void and has an argument which is an async callback of appointment books. And the async callback is the object to which the appointment returned by the ping method is delivered. This is a different style of programming that you're used to. So, what's a good way to explain this? It's like saying, hey, part of this interface is like, sure, I'll call the ping on the server side, and I promise that when that ping method returns, I will deliver its value back to this other object that you gave me. And then, so this way, you can specify what you want done with that appointment when I'm ready to do that, or when the service is done returning that appointment book. Then on the client side, the method of this async callback will be invoked. And looking at that async callback, let's expand it out. And I'm going to extract a couple more methods here. I should really use the archetype because it's kind of hard to leave. So. Here, which is alert. Oops, what is it like? Oh, there's already one? Sweet. Wait a second. I don't want to keep the original one. Okay. Oh, and I put it in the wrong place. Sorry. Put it in an appointment book, and I want to call alert there, and it's, sorry. That's cool. And then here I want to say, yeah. Here I guess now I want to say, we'll have a method, and we'll call this display appointment book, display in alert dialog. Okay, maybe it's now a little bit easier to read. Async callback is an interface with two methods. And I think I want them in a different order. Oops. There. Async callback is an interface that specifies what should happen when with the return value of one of these remote methods. Two things can happen. You can have a successful return or you can have a failed return. So for instance, hey, I call my ping method and I get an appointment book and everything's great, yay! The onSuccess method is called in that case. I can call the ping method and something bad happens. Oh, the server's not available. Oh, there was a null pointer exception that occurred while invoking that ping method on the server side. Something bad happens. In that case, an exception is delivered to an onFailure method. This is parameterized by an appointment book, so that's how you know that this. So even though this is a GWT class, async callback, it can be parameterized to take your thing, which is the return type of the ping method. And so, and this is kind of a wacky thing about GWT. Again, it's like I want to call this. I want to reference this remote object, which resides on my server. I say, hey, give me your ping service, and I'm going to call the ping method on it, and it doesn't return, and it returns immediately before the work on the server side is complete, so that I can move on and handle other events. But when that work on the server side is complete, then it gets delivered to this async callback method that I provided. And this way I can specify my logic so I can say, hey, when I successfully get an appointment book, display an alert dialog. If there's a problem, call the alert method and throw out that exception. Makes sense enough? Okay. That's basically what event handling in GWT is all about. So, to recap, I create my button, and I say, hey, when the button's clicked, ping the server. What does it mean to ping the server? I go and I get my remote object, my ping service async, and I say, hey, go call the ping method. Magic ensues, and ultimately the code on the server side is invoked. What is returned is either an appointment book when things are successful, or an exception when things are not successful. And then I do something with that, right? I handle that result. If it's successful, I display it in an alert dialog. So what do? I create a string builder with the toString from the airline. I put in some flights. I should probably also put a new line here. And then I iterate over my flights and append it to the string builder, one line at a time. And then I alert it up to the screen. And also for my alert method, when something goes wrong, I just print that. So this is client-side code. This is Java code, which is compiled into JavaScript. Think about the classes that I've used in this code. I've used GWT classes like button and window.alert. I guess this is also a also GWT code. I've used GWT code like click event. Great, that's all cool stuff. But I've also used my code, like appointment book. I've also used standard Java code like string builder and collection. And whatever is returned by getAppointments, right? This is an array list. So all of that stuff, all those Java classes exist in JavaScript. Not all Java classes can exist as JavaScript. As a matter of fact, there's a subset of them. If you go look in the GWT documentation, you'll see that GWT supports essentially JavaScript implementations of a number of standard Java APIs. Things like a lot of stuff in Java.line package, string and string builder and string buffer. And you can also use a bunch of interfaces, exceptions, throwable, stuff like that. Lots of classes in Java.util. Many of the collection classes. So the interfaces like collection and lists and stuff like that, but also the concrete implementations like array list and hash set. And things like that, which is really great, right? So you can use these Java classes that you're used to, that you've been using since Project 1, now in GWT. So that's really cool. I'm not going to go into the details, but I have made it so that my classes, things like Abstract Appointment Book, can also be used in GWT. So I've instructed it. Basically all I have to do is just tell the GWT compiler, hey, this is a class that can be used in JavaScript, because there are certain rules and stuff like that. That yes, you can use it, and anything that's in your client package is assumed to be or actually must be JavaScript compatible, must be simple enough so that it can be converted into JavaScript. I go into more detail in the lecture, and I probably explain it a little better there too. While JavaScript has, while GWT has support for a lot of classes and objects in Java, there's some that it doesn't. I/O classes, for instance. Nope, you can't create a socket in GWT on the client side. Date format is another one that you're probably used to using. You can't use it or rather, GWT doesn't support date format. It's too complex, right? There's a lot of work there and everything like that, and they'd have to essentially re-implement all that logic in JavaScript. And so either it'd be like, lots of time for them to do, probably very error prone, and also they provide simpler APIs. The regular expression API, I think you can use the API, but it uses native JavaScript regular expressions, which are a little different from native Java ones, and so then the rules are kind of different that way, et cetera, et cetera. Here again, it's all in the documentation. But one of the things you need to be cognizant of when you build GWT applications is that all this stuff that's in the client package and all the stuff that's used by stuff in the client package has to be JavaScript compatible, has to be compilable by GWT. You will find this out when you go and compile your code. So in GWT, the Maven project is compiled not only to just compile the Java source code into .class files, you have been. It also, there's a GWT plugin that knows how to compile your client-side Java code into JavaScript. And so then as you're building out your application, if you trip across one of these classes that's not supported in JavaScript, most likely your datetime format, or your date format, because gets you every year, your compilation will fail. And it'll give you this error message, which will be different than usual along the lines of, well, there's no JavaScript compatible class for this date format. As a matter of fact, let's just do that. Let's here in this guy, let's see here, my flights probably don't have, my appointment probably doesn't have a date. Oh no, it does, end time. Sweet, okay, cool. Date is supported, but date format isn't. So let's do that, get end time, that's great. Here, so here's the current implementation. Basically all I'm doing is returning, return date.toString. Let's see here. I think if I just reload my web page, it should recompile it. Yep, nice. Recompiling it and everything works. Super awesome. Now, let's instead do the following. Let's say date format java.text dot date time format. Nope. Oh, that's the right way to do it. Simple date format, and then y, month, dd, hour, minute, minute, AM, PM, something like that. Oof, don't know where I just pulled that out of. Format, date. So you probably got something similar to this somewhere in your application, right? You format the date and you use the thing that we learned about in, for project 3, and we learned about in the Java util lecture. Use java.text.simpleDateFormat or some variant thereof to format your date. Okay. Now let's see what happens when we reload. Failed. Try again. Does it? Oh, nice. Huh? Even tells me what went wrong. So it said, okay, errors in file, appointment book GWT, appointment book can't be resolved to a type, blah, 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 blah. Finally, you sort of like get down low enough. No source code is available for type simple date format. Did you forget to inherit a required module? The way, one of the things that you need to do in order to make, in order to let the GWT compiler, well, compile your source code into JavaScript is make your source code available. This particular class doesn't have the source code available on purpose because here again it doesn't have an implementation that can be easily converted into JavaScript. So this is telling us that I can't use simple date format. Well, what do you need to do? You need to use the GWT date formatting tools, which here again are available in the that are described in the lecture. So date format. No, I had it there. What was it called? Date time format. Date time format. Nice. Dot get format. It's got a bunch of those are all deprecated. Fine. Get date format pattern. It makes me use the same one. Maybe we can just undo and get that format string because I can't remember what I typed. Pattern, sure. Date time format. Dot get format from pattern. Format date. I reloaded it. Oh, that's the error. I don't want to do that. Reload this. Compiling. The compilation was successful. And now when I ping it, yep, I've got the year 5627. Something's obviously wrong. That's messed up. Okay. M must not mean what I think it means. Is it capital M here? And little m there? Nice to know. Oops. Reload! Yeah, that looks better. That was weird. Why did you get like 50? What does M mean? Oh, minutes. Yeah, okay, right. Obviously got it wrong. Okay. Anyway, so two things to learn from this little thing right here. One is that there are certain, so while you can use a lot of Java code on the client side, there are some classes that you can't use. When you try to use one of those classes, you get a compilation error. And also, there was going to be another thoughtful and insightful, I hate being sick. Oh, and the other thing, well, I guess a couple of things, right? I could use IntelliJ to like do all this stuff because it's Java, yay. But I think most interestingly and most importantly, in order to test my changes, all I had to do was reload the page. That's what this is what the GWT development mode gives you, right? So the same sort of like, things that you have when you're writing JavaScript. You just like change your file and reload it in your browser and the changes are there. You get that same rapid feedback. You get that same rapid development, but now in Java code. Sweet. So, okay. Mind's blown yet? Wishing you'd sign up for a math course instead this summer? No, it gets better. Okay, so it's 7 o'clock. Let's take a little break, and then I want to do a little bit more with this, and then we'll get on to the code kata. So let's take 10. Commit this real quick.
Well, we didn't get that far last week, so I think we can.
Refactored a bunch of code. Oops. A bunch of code to make it easier to read.
I have the math. The math is what?
And then.
You might want to go another way.
Second. Okay, thanks. Oh wait, sorry, let me turn this off. Keep recording.
Check your, if you do it as an array, you have